Okay, everybody, welcome to the Utility Week podcast. My name is James Wallin. I am the editor of Utility Week. We're now into double figures with these podcasts. I think that's how it works with podcast number 2. We've taken on your feedback from the first one. The main feedback was people wanted Ruth Williams, the chief correspondent of Utility Week, to join the podcast. So here we are again. Welcome, Ruth, to the podcast.
Hi.
How are you?
Dandy, thank you.
Good.
Very excited to be talking about assets.
So as Ruth has indicated, we're going to be discussing the Next Generation Asset Management and Capital Projects Conference, which we held in September. This was an evolution of our Water Asset Management Conference, in which we had a day dedicated to capital projects, talking about some of the exciting things that are going on across the water sector, but also talking about how approaches to asset management are evolving. So we had 2 days of content, panels and presentations, and some fascinating topics that came up, not just around the particular projects that are underway in the sector, but also, of course, about the wider themes, about regulation, about financing of these projects, including the whole life costs of some of these projects, sustainable options, and of course the ever-present topic of the public perception of the water sector and how that affects investment. So Ruth, you were there across both days. You were presenting on the second day. What were your kind of takeaways from the conference?
I thought that it was great how much optimism there felt to be in the rooms. Sort of what can be achieved, but obviously that was tempered with we can't engineer our way out of absolutely every problem that the sector is facing, and some of the problems, climate change, we don't know what direction entirely they're going to take us in. So there are concerns obviously around deliverability, given how difficult some things have been during the current asset management period for water companies to actually get delivered. And then if they want to spend many multiples that much and deliver even larger projects from 2025 onwards, there are concerns around deliverability.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we should put this in the context of where we are in the water sector at the moment. So we are in that kind of panto period between the draft determinations coming out from Ofwat and the final determinations. So you were getting quite a bit of this from the water companies of them putting forward the case for investment in these projects. It's always, as we've discussed many times, Ruth, it's difficult to tell how genuine these concerns are when they come up every single price control. But I mean, we were pushing people on this, and it does seem like there is a very real risk, or at least that's what the water companies are saying wholeheartedly. There's a very real risk that you're not going to get the investment in these very large projects that we need for the future-proofing the water sector under the current approach from Ofwat.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, as you say, part of the panto back and forth. But everyone seems in agreement that things are more intense this time round for PR24. It'd be interesting to see how it plays out and who wins over the next few months.
Indeed it will. So that's the context of this. So we had a day devoted to capital projects, and then we had a day devoted to asset management, which very much still remains the kind of Cinderella solution there. There's a lot being expected of these assets that are already in the ground. As you've mentioned, we've got the impacts of climate change on those. So sometimes there are concerns that it can be overlooked, that we need to spend money on maintaining those assets as well as the kind of the shiny projects. But let's start with some of those shiny projects. So we heard from Anglian, who are one of the companies that are planning new reservoirs in their area. So they've got 2 new reservoirs that they're approaching. So we had Jeff Darch from the company came along to talk about those. I mean, fascinating stuff that they're doing there. Some of the designs that they've got for these reservoirs and the plans to make them public space, really, really interesting. But ambitious, these projects, aren't they, Ruth?
They're ambitious, and I think they're ambitious not only because we haven't, well, in my lifetime, there's not been a reservoir built in this country. So they're ambitious in that sense, but they're ambitious also because of how they are enabling all the companies to look not just at their own region, but what their neighbours' needs are, and how it really is a sense that they're working together for the water needs of the country, not just any one region in isolation.
And we also heard, in terms of the kind of transfer schemes and these innovative ideas, about the Grand Union Canal project, which I know you've spoken to Affinity Water about. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that project?
Yeah, that's a brilliant project. It's Severn Trent working with Affinity, and they will transfer treated wastewater effluent from the Midlands using the canal network, including the Grand Union Canal, and then move it south into Affinity's patch, so that it can then be treated again to go into their reservoir and then into their drinking water system. Although the team at Affinity said that it's not going to be quite as engineering ambitious, there will be some intricate pieces of engineering in it. But in terms of what it's doing as a sort of national project, it's definitely huge. Not least in terms of how much area it's going to cover and the complexities of having to work with local councils and planning departments, across a huge chunk of the country. Yeah, some really good partnerships that they're developing there with the Canals Trust, which we heard about at the conference. So lots of really interesting projects. I don't think they come much more high profile in the water sector than the Thames Tideway, the super sewer project in London, which is inching towards completion. I think they're on track to hand over to Thames Water next year. On track and on budget.
Absolutely, yeah. And there were, we had Roger Bailey, the Chief Technical Officer of the Thames Tideway, talking at the conference. And as you say, amazing really that they have only had a slight delay because of a small thing called a pandemic that came in. But
I forgot about that.
That happened. And the expectations as well of the cost of it. It's really, really interesting, really impressive. Actually, he mentioned that the early expectations on the impact on customer bills were around £70 to £80 a year. The estimates now are around £20 to £25 per year. That's in 2014 prices. Now, Roger was talking about some of the things that they've planned in there, and he was talking about the fact that the project is going to eliminate 95% of spills. That was the figure he came up with. And we asked him afterwards why he'd set why they had set this target at 95%. Why weren't they trying to eliminate spills completely? And what was the reaction from environmental groups to that?
The reason it's not 90, it's not 100%, is because a storm can come, fill up the tunnel, and then another storm could come before the tunnel is pumped out. Yeah. So if you were going to eliminate that risk, you'd have to have double the size of the tunnel, and then you might get 3 storms coming, boom, 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 and then people have paid an enormous amount for a huge tunnel that's maybe only ever filled up properly once every 25 years or something. As it is, the tunnel as it's designed may take flows every week. It's more likely to be partially filled every couple of weeks and completely filled 5 or 6 times in a year. So you're not paying £4.5 billion for something that's filled up 5 or 6 times of the year. It doesn't make sense to pay £10 billion for something that will never ever be reached. So that's how we reach that point. Mm-hmm. I didn't maybe explain it too well, but I mean, if in 2014, 65 million tons of sewage went into the river. That was modelled at 2.5 million if all the systems had been working. Now, if that 2.5 million occurs, in certain times of the year where the temperature is low, where there's smaller spills, it has a limited effect on the river. And the river actually responds within a couple of weeks, and it sort of fixes itself. Okay, what's gone into the river in terms of sewage-derived litter will stay there, but the actual oxygen impact is recovered over 2 to 3 weeks. So the river is an organism itself, an ecosystem. So, and I think there is no necessity, and it doesn't make sense to go to that extent of extreme protection. Mm-hmm. And that was discussed very much in the early stages all the way through. That's nothing new. That's been there since the studies that were done in 2000.
So, as Roger says, that's been talked about for a long time. What has changed now, of course, is the public perceptions around spills, and that's something we're going to discuss in a moment. But I just want to carry on that recording to listen a bit to Cheryl Steventon, who's the director of major projects at Ofwat, who kind of picks up that theme around compromise between what the public would ideally like and what is going to be achievable and affordable.
You can have a completely gold-plated system that would never ever have any issues, and as you were saying, would be perfect, whatever it was the environment could throw at it. But then the bill impact of that would be so astronomical, it just wouldn't make sense. And I think we do need to get better at communicating some of that and taking a bit of the heat out of some of the debate. It is very emotive, especially in water. We were discussing earlier that I think people feel very connected to water because you can go and pick it up in a bucket, you can swim in the river, or you can walk alongside it, you can see it in a way that other industries, maybe with electricity and things, you can't so much. Mm-hmm. So we need to respond to that. But I think also we need to have sensible conversations about what is going to have the biggest impact on the environment and the biggest improvement that we can make for the money that we're spending. So it's not always necessarily the noisy, very visible issues. It might be issues like PFAS or microplastics or pharmaceuticals or any one of 100 other issues. This one is currently the flavour of the day, and it's been picked up in media, and it's very emotive and you can see it. But there will be another one coming, and I think that comes to the future planning and being able to explain to consumers and to environmental groups and invite them in as well. So talking with the NGOs, what are their concerns? How can we look forward to doing things in this period, but also looking at AMP9, looking beyond, because this will be an iterative process. But we then have to have a grown-up conversation with customers about what the bill impacts will be.
So I should say that we went on, I won't play the whole Q&A session, but went on to ask Cheryl what the role of the regulator is in that, because I think there would have been many water companies sat there listening to somebody from Ofwat saying that and thinking, well, yeah, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And she did talk about the fact that they were trying to shift their approach, that they didn't want to just be seen as an old kind of civil service approach where they stay quiet for most of the time and occasionally they pop their head up above the parapet and give the water companies a bit of a telling off. They want to change that narrative. How important is it that the regulator is doing their bit to improve that perception of the sector?
I mean, I think it needs to come from all sides. We can't just have the regulator saying it, because how many bill payers know who Ofwat and what Ofwat do?
Very true.
Are they trusted? Customers don't necessarily trust their water company, or even if they trust their individual company, they don't trust the sector as a whole. Mm-hmm. So the message needs to not just come from the companies or from the regulators. It needs to come from all sides, and there needs to be a bit more support, I feel, from government, from a completely external source. But yeah, I think it's definitely too much to sort of expect consumers to have an understanding of all the complexities and the trade-offs and how much it's going to cost them, especially for things that they think they're already paying for and should already be getting, or that companies should automatically be doing. Yeah. And whether they still are quite as adamant that that's what they expect when they know what the bill impact would be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's I appreciate that it is so difficult, but when we're at conferences like this, and let's remember that this is an asset management conference. It's for engineers. It's not where we're there necessarily talking about regulation or talking about the customer perception of the sector, but it always comes up. Always comes up. It absolutely does.
It underpins everything.
It absolutely does, and you can't stop that from bubbling over. And when you hear people talk at these kind of conferences, you think, well, if only the public could hear this. If only they could.
Completely. We're hearing Thames Water a couple of years ago talk about their first interactive map of where every storm overflow in their region was and how it was behaving, what it had done in the past 48 hours, what works were planned to be done on that each catchment to improve the water in the area. And you think, he was speaking so passionately about it. And it's like, wow, everyone in the country needs to sit and hear this to understand it. But he was talking to a room of people who were already, preaching to the converted.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we really need to hear that that voice. It's not coming through. I understand how that there aren't really the avenues to do that. They're not given the open space to do that. But I'm not sure that anybody is really trying that hard either to get that message through. It feels to me like the sector, and I'd include everybody, the regulators, the water companies, the trade body, they're on the defensive the whole time, apologising the whole time. But we heard some really passionate defences of the sector at this conference. We had Andrew Beaver, the regulation director at Northumbrian, was talking about the fact that actually we have a world-class water system. We have drinking water quality there is nowhere that's better than this country. We have lower levels of leakage than in the rest of Europe. We have certainly comparable levels of customer service and bills that are much lower than in other countries. That's another thing that gets forgotten about in this debate.
Yeah.
You talk to people in France or Italy, their water bills are much higher than they are in this country, and that's because they've been kept artificially low over the past few price controls, and that's where a lot of the problems, not all, that's where a lot of the problems have come from. Let's hear, talking about somebody talking with passion. There was a fantastic presentation from Matt Wheeldon, who's the infrastructure director at Wessex Water, who delivered a presentation that was on combined sewer overflows and whether we have got the right approach to those. Spoiler, he doesn't think we have. He actually got a standing ovation at the end of his presentation, which I don't think I've ever seen.
It's got to be a first for an industry
It is. No one's ever given me a
a
standing ovation, so I was quite offended. But let's just hear this. This is a slightly longer clip than we've heard before, but I didn't want to interrupt the flow.
How do we build back better? I don't like quoting Boris Johnson, but I just have to. 5 great ideas. That isn't one of them. 1. Think rain, not sewage. Adopt the 2 principles of good rainwater management. This requires a fundamental shift in thinking. 2. Have you read the government's National Rainwater Management Strategy? Of course you haven't. It doesn't exist. Rain doesn't care which government body is responsible. It runs across them all. And our approach is just not joined up. We do not have an overarching strategy underpinned by these 2 principles, which looks at how do we amend legislation. How do we use economic incentives? How do we adapt regulation to drive a decentralised approach to rainwater management? Because that is what we need. We need to stop seeing rain as something that comes from afar and goes afar. We need to think about rain locally. Raindrops are fine and manageable as long as you don't introduce them to their neighbours. Because it's always the problem is downstream. And just a nod to the DWMPs, I know Tom's in the audience, great idea, but unless we change the top line strategy and provide the levers that we need to deliver good drainage plans. Remember, water companies are a minor stakeholder in drainage. We're being asked to lead. Everyone's a minor stakeholder in drainage. There's no major stakeholder. The EA are a minor stakeholder. Local authorities are a minor stakeholder. Water companies are a minor stakeholder. There is no major lead in drainage because it crosses so many different departments. Hey guys, look, sorry to be depressing, but we can't even get it right on a greenfield site. Today, when I build a house, I do not have to make my home water efficient because document G of the building regs has not been amended to make water efficiency mandatory. I don't have to put sustainable drainage at the back end in my garden because document H has not been amended and Schedule 3 has not been enacted 14 years late. If I'm a developer, I can still connect rain to that nice combined sewer out there because the highways people have said no to the highways drain and the water company has to accept it. Well, let's remove that right to connect or make it conditional on 120% offsetting or adding that liquid to that sewer. If I'm a developer and I want to get rid of my rain off-site to the watercourse, but oh my goodness me, the riparian owner is going to charge me a fortune, it's okay that there's a combined sewer there. I'll connect to that. No, give them the powers to connect rain to the watercourse. I wonder here, does anyone change their behaviour if they get a service for free? You don't, do you? And highways is a big problem because it's written into law that rain should not be valued. It's in the Water Industry Act. Don't value rain, it says. Or actually, when it says you can't charge for rain, it's exactly the same. They can't charge us, we can't charge them. So no one's going to do anything different with highway drainage unless someone actually values the service that's being provided. Highways drainage is undermapped, underfunded, undervalued, and it needs to be brought into that same conversation about draining properties. If I live in a house and I want to connect my rain and the only place is a highway drain, the highway officer says no, full stop. Why? There's no incentive. There's no means for them to collect any revenue from providing that service. It doesn't exist. And yet they are part of the solution. Let's go back. That is my driveway. So I was having a new driveway. I took the opportunity to take my roof raw water off the foul sewer, or the combined sewer. That cost me £3,200. The payback period is 123 years. That is a really good economic incentive for me to do it. I can't understand why my neighbours aren't doing the same. I have to do it, I've got to practice what I preach. My point is, yesterday I got a letter from Dan Norris, who's Metro Mayor for West of England, offering me discount on getting solar panels on my house. How come? Because the government recognises that energy efficiency is a societal problem. Why can't I get a grant to build that? Answer, no one recognises that rainwater management is a societal issue. Do you know what my standing charge is for gas and electricity? It's £360 a year. My sewage standing charge is £60 a year. A lot of my gas and electricity standing charge goes to the government for a fund so they can fund these kind of things. Why are we not seeing rainwater management as a societal issue? We have to, in order to change the dial. I know there's some regulators here. I will be kind. We've set the wrong targets. Thank you. The primary objective of storm overflows is to prevent sewer flooding and to protect the environment. Those should be the target. Regulation should have then said, yes, now how you do that is important. And we're not getting that how you do it, the way in which we tackle storm overflows, because I admit they need to be tackled, is important. And so we should be incentivising doing things in the right way, not incentivising outputs that are crippling our environment. At the moment, thanks to no overarching strategy, poor legislation, poor regulation, we're going to be spending £60 billion reducing storm overflow discharges, mostly in the wrong way. If you can't remember a word of what I've said from this presentation when you go home and you tell your spouse about this rather enthusiastic person ranting about rain, just remember these There are 8 words here. I'm going to increase the word count by 2. We want your poo. Please keep and reuse your rain.
What a powerful presentation.
Oh, absolutely. And everyone was talking about it afterwards. You know, other people were saying he's spot on. We are spending this amount of customers' money and we are all complicit in wasting this amount of customers' money.
Yeah.
And how disappointed customers are going to be in the next few years when that money has been spent.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the problems are not all magically fixed.
Yeah, exactly. And I just don't see why you can't have that conversation with the public. I mean, yeah, some of those things where he's reflecting on particular bits of legislation. Okay, that's going to go over people's heads. But the idea of rainwater reuse, this idea that nobody owns drainage, I think that's a really powerful message. I think that's one that the public can get on board with, and it just seems to me that it's one that the water sector should be pushing. I mean, this is something that we can't keep kicking down the road. We're going to have to address this.
No, and there's been a lot of calls for, you know, we need sustainable urban drainage systems, and they keep being governments of all colours keep flirting with introducing a mandate for sustainable urban drainage systems. Wales has it. Hopefully England will follow in the not distant future. But it's got to be essential.
Yeah, absolutely. But it just seems to me that you can, with something like that, with a passionate presentation that is accessible to people. I think you can bring the public on side.
Oh, totally. I mean, you know, compare that to solar panels.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, people have got on board with solar panels. He made such a great point there. Why, you know, it's already very expensive to get your driveway redone. Why would someone then choose a permeable surface to have just so it drains away if they can't understand or see the value and the benefits to it? Yeah. But if they thought their house might flood, then
yeah, absolutely, and I think focusing on the house as well. I think that's really important. It's a message I've been banging on about for a long time, both in energy and water. I think we talk about things too much in isolation. We talk about water efficiency. We talk about energy efficiency. We don't talk enough to people about their houses, and I think that's how you could get through to people. You know, they're talking about these kind of exciting opportunities with rainwater reuse. I just don't think people know about it. I really don't. I genuinely don't think that anybody thinks about when you flush your toilet. That is, several bottles of Evian that you're pouring down that toilet.
Most of us don't have Evian in our systems.
Well, that's just my house. Yes, admittedly, I'm a bit of an outlier. But I don't think anybody's thinking about that. You know, washing their car with that kind of food grade product.
And no one is thinking when they put a patio in their back garden that they're stopping water getting back into the watercourses. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So lots of myths that can be punctured. I mean, one of the classic ones is about your wet summer, and that's obviously comes through most commonly in hosepipe ban, but it's been raining for months. As we know, water is not going where we need it to go. We talked about the reasons for that. We're not capturing enough. It's not being soaked up. Also, problems around perceptions of leakage. Leakage probably next to pollution is probably one of the most visible things for the public. This seems to be one of the great barriers to talking about water efficiency, is because customers will, or at least the fear that customers will bring up leakage levels, and why should I save water when it's spurting out of a pipe down the road. How much that's true, I'm not entirely sure, but certainly there's a perception from the public that leakage is a problem. And well, you look at the figures. We recently had the Ofwat company performance report come out. Doesn't make very good reading for the sector. Leakage isn't going in the right direction, but
It's going in the right direction.
well, okay, yes, it's going not as fast
not
as
as-
yes,
as-
exactly, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, bring it back to the wet summer. So there's also an understandable confusion from the public about, why would you be getting the problems with cracked pipes in dry earth when we've had a very wet summer. Now, Jeremy Heath, the innovation manager from SES Water, was talking about this very topic. Another passionate speaker. So he explained.
For the last 3 summers, we've seen an extended burst period from soil dry out in the UK. I was really surprised, again, when I was talking with the leakage managers, and this is one of the questions I asked, look, in my opinion, this last summer has been a wet summer. I've not been down by the seaside with a knotted handkerchief on my head, going, fantastic, look at all that sun. And yet some of our companies were going, no, we saw sustained bursts over this summer period. We saw soil moisture deficit going above 120 or above 100. It starts, 120 it gets seriously bad. Companies are reporting back and going, no, even in a wet summer like we've just experienced, we are still finding summer breakout. Anglian Water done some excellent work, and they've looked at climate vulnerable mains. And they've said, okay, we want to understand which mains are most likely to fail in these ways. And they define them in the following way. They're going to be rigid materials. Okay, so it's your AC, your cast irons, your PVCs. Smaller diameters, typically 320 and below. For goodness sake, that to me is a big relief, okay? Because it does mean that our trunk mains are less susceptible to this, okay? But laid in highly shrinkable soils, that's your peats and your clays. I did, as part of my leakage roadmap that we talked about, the leakage innovation heat map, I travelled the country, I met with every water company. Before I turned up at their offices, I read their annual report for the previous year, which was 22-23. And every single one talked about summer breakout. It's across the entire country. Every water company has areas where they will struggle with this. And you get that sustained burst period. 6 weeks we saw it at SES Water, 6 weeks of continual bursts. At a time when your crews are away on holiday, you've got reduced staff anyway. The worst possible time. All the sprinklers are coming on and they look like bursts. The result of that is we are really, really struggling with managing the outbreak of bursts in the summer now. And the obvious example would be for us to say, okay, look, let's just replace the pipes. But we are struggling to justify these extensive mains replacement programs. And in fact, Anglian, when I was talking with them yesterday, just confirmed that, in fact, they'd not been able to get their climate vulnerable mains accepted. It leaves us in a really difficult situation.
So, Jeremy, they're presenting their, the real challenges that that asset managers are facing, and that's just in one area, and worrying to hear there that companies are struggling to get the funding for these kind of programs that is obviously needed. We discussed at the conference that sometimes asset management can be overshadowed. There's a real risk, though, it seems, that if we're not investing now, we're creating problems for the future.
It is kicking the can down the road. And I think 5 years ago at PR19, this stage, that's what companies were saying, is we can't keep sweating and stretching our assets. They will fail. And we're going to continue seeing that if these projects, if asset management isn't funded. It does feel like big, shiny, new capital projects do sort of attract the investment that they need, and then everything else gets a bit squeezed in the business plans, which just can't continue.
Yeah, absolutely. The new government, the early signs with the water special measures bill, aren't exactly that encouraging, that we're going to move away from this, constantly bashing water companies over the heads. But certainly from speaking to the water companies, it does seem like behind the scenes dialogue is at least happening. The Labour government seems to have shown an appetite for tackling difficult subjects. So you would hope, I suppose, that once we've got, they have to get this out of their system and talk about locking up water company bosses and banning bonuses and all this sort of stuff, which seems very difficult to do under any kind of labour law. But once they've got that out of the system, let's hope that we're going to have a serious conversation. There was quite a lot of talk on the second day of this conference about us being at this kind of peak or trough, whichever you want to put it, of a public spotlight on the sector. And while that's uncomfortable for the sector, it's also a time when everybody's focused on water. So now is the time to make these arguments, isn't it?
Absolutely, and all the sort of negative attention that pollution in rivers and CSOs have brought, they've brought investment. And I was talking to now the former CEO of Wessex a couple of months ago, and he was saying, well, no, he's welcomed the spotlight on CSOs because they've been asking for to be able to invest in these systems for a long time, and now suddenly they're allowed to.
Yeah, absolutely. Which comes back to the point we're making throughout this recording, really that everybody needs to be trying to put this push this narrative forward. At the moment, it just feels to me like too many apologies and not enough moving the debate on. But
no, I think we need Matt and Jez to be, doing regular TED Talks.
Absolutely, yeah.
Touring the nation, inspiring the people.
Indeed. Okay, well, I think that's covered everything we wanted to say about the conference. I think it just remains to give a little plug for our wastewater conference, which is coming up on the 28th and 29th of January 2025. That's our next water conference, so we'll hope to see many of you there. But for now, thank you very much, Ruth, for your comments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you, everybody, and goodbye.